On a quiet afternoon, a tiny girl, barely 8, ran through the busy street with tears rolling down her cheeks. She clutched a small doll to her chest and begged the first police officer she saw, "Please come with me. It's my mom." No one imagined what awaited inside her home. On a quiet afternoon, Sergeant Harris was patrolling the streets, his boots crunching against the pavement, when he suddenly felt a tug at his uniform. Startled, he looked down to see a little girl, no older than 8, standing there with tears streaking her cheeks. Her tiny hands clutched a worn-out doll, its fabric faded from years of love, and her eyes were wide with fear. She could barely breathe between sobs, yet her voice came out desperate, trembling with urgency. "Please, officer, you have to come with me. It's my mom. She won't wake up." For a brief second, Harris froze, trying to process what he had just heard. His training had prepared him for armed threats, accidents, even violent confrontations, but nothing could prepare him for the raw terror in a child's voice. He crouched down to her level, softening his tone. "Sweetheart, slow down. What happened?" She gripped his hand tightly, her little fingers cold and trembling. "Please, follow me. Mommy needs help. Please, don't let her die." The sincerity in her voice cut through the noise of the busy street. People nearby had stopped, their conversations fading into whispers as they watched the girl plead with the officer. Some shook their heads sadly. Others covered their mouths, unsure of what tragedy they were about to witness. But Harris didn't hesitate another second. He signaled to his partner, and together they followed the girl, who darted ahead with surprising speed, her doll dragging against the ground. The officer's heavy boots echoed behind her as she led, them down winding, narrow streets that grew quieter with each step. The lively chatter of the city was replaced by the creak of rusted gates and the distant barking of a dog. The girl's thin figure seemed so fragile against the backdrop of crumbling buildings, yet the determination in her stride kept the officers moving faster. Harris's heart pounded harder with every turn they took. This wasn't just a frightened child inventing a story. There was truth in her urgency. Something inside told him that time mattered, that every second could make a difference. His partner muttered under his breath, "God, I hope we're not too late." Finally, the girl skidded to a stop in front of a run-down apartment block at the edge of the neighborhood. The paint was peeling, windows cracked, and the front door hung crooked on its hinges. Without a moment's pause, she shoved it open and yelled, "Here! Please, come quick!" Her voice echoed through the hollow stairwell, trembling with desperation. The officers rushed inside, their senses on high alert. The smell of dampness and neglect clung to the air. Toys were scattered across the floor, dishes piled high in the sink, and a blanket lay crumpled on the floor as though someone had been too weak to fold it. But what seized their attention was the woman lying motionless on the worn-out couch. The usually little girl ran to her, dropping her doll, and shook her shoulders frantically. "Mommy! Mommy, wake up! I brought help!" Her voice cracked as sobs racked her tiny body. Sergeant Harris hurried over, kneeling by the woman's side. She looked pale, her lips dry, and her body frighteningly still. He pressed his fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. For a tense moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the room was silent except for the girl's cries. Then, faint, almost fragile, he felt it. A pulse. Weak, but present. "She's alive," he whispered, relief washing over his face. He quickly pulled out his radio, calling for immediate medical backup. His partner checked the woman's breathing, nodding grimly. She needed urgent care, but there was hope. The little girl's tear-streaked face lifted, searching his eyes. "You can save her, right? Please don't take my mommy away." Harris swallowed hard, his voice steady but filled with compassion. "We're going to do everything we can, Emily. You were so brave to find us. You may have just saved your mom's life." The girl's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, her small hand clutching her mother's lifeless fingers. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "I was so scared no one would listen." Harris placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm listening, and I promise, you're not alone anymore." The sound of distant sirens grew louder, and for the first time since she had tugged at his uniform, A flicker of hope passed through the little girl's eyes. The shrill wail of sirens filled the narrow street, bouncing off the cracked walls of the old building. Within moments, paramedics rushed into the dim apartment, their red bags swinging as they set them down by the couch. Emily clung tightly to her doll, Rosie, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She pressed herself against the wall, watching with fear and hope tangled together as strangers surrounded her mother. "Pulse is weak, but she's still with us," one paramedic said urgently. They carefully lifted the frail woman onto a stretcher, the thin blanket beneath her slipping to the floor. Emily darted forward, clutching at the stretcher with both hands. "Be gentle, please. She's all I have." Her small voice cracked with desperation, slicing through the chaos of medical commands and radio chatter. Sergeant Harris bent down quickly, meeting her eyes. "It's all right, Emily. They're here to help her. You did the right thing." But Emily's face was full of fear. What if she doesn't come back? Her words were barely more than a whisper, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of worry. Harris felt a lump in his throat. He had been on the force for over a decade, had seen tragedy and courage side by side, but the way this little girl spoke pierced through every layer of his training. He crouched lower, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Listen to me, Emily. You saved her life today. Without you, we wouldn't have found her in time. That makes you a hero, do you understand?" Her tear-stained face tilted toward him, uncertain, but listening. "I'm a hero," she repeated softly, as though the word didn't quite fit someone so small. "The bravest one I've met," Harris assured her. As the paramedics wheeled her mother toward the ambulance, Emily clutched her doll tighter and hurried alongside them, afraid of being left behind. Harris noticed how thin and frail she looked too, her clothes worn and shoes a size too small. When they passed the kitchen, his eyes caught on the details. The nearly empty cupboards, the stack of unpaid bills spilling across the counter, the refrigerator that hummed with power but rattled with emptiness. Life had clearly been cruel to this little family, and yet this tiny girl had found the strength to run for help. The child's innocence broke the silence as she whispered to her doll, "See, Rosie, I told you someone would come." Harris's chest tightened at the sight. This wasn't just a child in need. It was a child who had been carrying the weight of survival on her small shoulders. He leaned closer, softening his voice. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emily," she answered, almost shyly, as though names no longer mattered in the chaos of her life. "Well, Emily, I promise. We're going to take care of you and your mom," he said with quiet conviction. Her eyes searched his, as if trying to see whether she could truly believe him. When the paramedics lifted her mother into the ambulance, Emily panicked, tugging at Harris's sleeve. "Please, don't make me stay here. I have to go with her." Without hesitation, Harris scooped her up into his arms, her doll squashed between them. "Of course you're going with her. You're not leaving her side." The ambulance ride was tense, every second feeling longer than the last. Emily sat close to her mother, holding her limp hand tightly with one hand and clutching Rosie with the other. Her lips moved constantly, whispering prayers only a child could form. "Don't leave me, Mommy. I need you. I need you to wake up." Harris sat nearby, his eyes moving between the heart monitor and the brave little girl who refused to let go. He had seen hardened men break under pressure, but here was a child showing more courage than most adults could summon. When they reached the hospital, the doors swung open and doctors rushed her mother into the emergency room. Emily tried to follow, but Harris gently caught her before she could stumble into the chaos. "Let them do their work, Emily. They'll take care of her." She clung to his arm, trembling. What if she never comes back out? He knelt down, meeting her fearful gaze. She's fighting, and now she has doctors and nurses helping. Her. You already gave her the best chance, Emily. Don't forget, you saved her. The girl pressed her face against his shoulder, exhausted from the storm of fear and courage she had lived through in just a few hours. Her small voice cracked as she whispered, "I was so scared no one would listen to me." Harris's grip tightened protectively. "But I listened, and I'll keep listening, Emily. You're not alone anymore." that moment, as the cold fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway flickered above them, Emily's tears slowed for the first time since she had come running down the street. For the first time, there was a flicker of safety in her eyes. Hours passed in the sterile hospital hallway. Emily sat curled up on a chair, clutching Rosie, her doll, against her chest as though it could shield her from the storm of fear. Sergeant Harris stayed close, refusing to leave her side. The constant beeping of machines and the hurried footsteps of doctors echoed around them. But for Emily, the world had narrowed down to one hope: her mother opening her eyes again. At last, the door to the emergency room swung open. A doctor stepped out, removing his mask, and the weariness on his face was replaced by a gentle, reassuring smile. Harris rose immediately, his heart pounding. Emily jumped to her feet, eyes wide, desperate for an answer before a single word was spoken. "She's stable now," the doctor said softly. "Exhaustion, dehydration, malnutrition. She pushed her body beyond its limits. But with rest and proper care, she will recover." Emily's lips parted in disbelief before joy spread across her tear-stained face. She's going to be okay?" The doctor nodded. "Yes. You saved her by bringing help when you did." Emily darted forward, her little shoes squeaking, against the floor, and clutched Harris's hand. "Can I see her, please?" Moments later, they entered the recovery room. The harsh light seemed softer here, bathing the frail woman in a glow that made her look almost peaceful. Her chest rose and fell steadily, each breath a promise of survival. Emily rushed to the bedside, dropping Rosie onto the sheets, and threw her small arms around her mother. "Mommy, it's me." "I told you I'd find help," she whispered, her voice trembling with love. Her mother stirred, eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze, though tired, locked onto her daughter. Tears welled up instantly. "Emily, you saved me," she breathed, her voice weak but filled with pride. The little girl buried her face in her mother's chest, sobbing, but this time they were tears of relief. Harris stood silently nearby, a lump in his throat, watching the raw purity of love that had driven this child to fight against fear. The woman turned her eyes to the officer, gratitude shining through her exhaustion. "Thank you for listening to her. Without you..." Her voice broke. Harris shook his head firmly. "Don't thank me. Thank your daughter. She never gave up. She's the bravest little girl I've ever met." In the days that followed, Harris visited often, checking on Emily and her mother. The more time he spent with them, the more he saw how much they had endured. Poverty, loneliness, silent battles no one had noticed. But he also saw their strength, especially in Emily, whose spirit shone brighter than the darkness around her. Nurses adored her, and doctors often smiled when she walked through the ward with Rosie tucked under her arm, telling stories about how her doll had kept her brave. One evening, as Harris prepared to leave, Emily ran after him down the hospital corridor, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She held out Rosie, the doll that had never left her side through fear and loneliness. The fabric was torn in places, one button eye hanging loosely, but she clutched it as if it were her most precious treasure. "Here," she said, pressing it into his hands. "Rosie kept me brave when I thought I was going to lose Mommy. Now, I want you to have her so you don't forget us." Harris was stunned. His throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. He knelt down, looking into her wide, earnest eyes. "Emily, I could never forget you or your mom. You've already given me something more precious than Rosie, your trust. But I promise I'll keep her safe, and whenever I look at her, I'll remember the little girl who showed me what true courage looks like." Emily's smile was small but radiant. "Then Rosie will make you brave too." Harris hugged her gently, careful not to crush the doll between them. As he pulled away, he looked at the tiny figure before him, this child who had run to him through a busy street, crying for help, yet strong enough to carry the weight of saving a life. She wasn't just a little girl anymore. She was living, proof that even the smallest voice can make the loudest difference. As Harris walked out into the cool night air, Rosie tucked under his arm, he glanced back at the hospital window where Emily waved at him beside her recovering mother. In that moment, he knew their story would never leave him. And somewhere deep inside, he realized a truth he would carry forever. Heroes come in all sizes, and sometimes the bravest one is a child with tears on her cheeks and love in her heart. Strong end. Heroes come in all sizes.